Hey everyone out there, my name is Father Sean Wilson. I serve as a priest in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. I'm the pastor of 4 parishes up in the northern part of St. Joseph in Wapakoneta, Immaculate Conception in Botkins, St. John of Freiburg, and St. Lawrence in Rhynie. I also get the pleasure of serving as the dean for the St. Augustine B Deanery. So that basically means I'm the kind of the regional representative in some sort of meetings and some other things, and kind of keep the group of priests together and in meetings and that sort of thing. So that's basically all the parishes in Shelby County, the ones out in Darke County, and then northern Miami County. So that goes all the way down to include like Troy and in West Milton and Piqua and Covington. So basically, there's 4 families of parishes in our deanery, and I get the pleasure of serving as the dean. And so recently in our area of the Archdiocese, there was a meeting kind of just generically called a Canon Law event. And since that meeting, I've just had a lot of ideas and kind of things floating around in my head, maybe things to pass along to the good people of our area, people that love so dearly and look forward to the day of joining everyone in heaven. And I unfortunately was not able to attend either of the evenings, either of the events, because of previously scheduled marriage prep meetings, and some of them were kind of hard to get on the calendar, so I didn't want to move those out of respect for the couples who I was meeting, but did hear a lot of feedback. So some pastoral council members agreed to go, a couple of our staff members, and then just heard from a general group of people who went to these Canon Law events. And genuinely, it's good to know the law of the church. So the presenter seemed, from everybody's estimation and kind of from the feedback, to know the law of the church. So the code of canon law governs life in the church. And like any good society, the church is ordered, right? There's orders, there's rules, and that's to respect rights, to make sure people don't overstep their boundaries. And so these things are good, right? They're good in the life of the church, to have boundaries, to have rules, to make sure people don't overstep. And it's always important to remember in the life of the church that the law of the church flows from revelation, right? It flows from our theology, and it flows from practice. So the laws of the church are not kind of just abstract, but over time, as the church is reflected on her mission and her role, and the best practices and what it means practically for our theology, that's where the code of canon law comes. And so the code of canon law, you can Google, you can buy a copy of it. It's all for free on the Vatican website. There's interpretations, there's all sorts of different things that people go to study the code of canon law and then become a church lawyer. And so that was who was presenting, a man who received his license in canon law. So license is just a license to practice. And so there's priests in the Archdiocese who have a license in canon law. We've got a couple permanent deacons. And then there's laity who serve with a law degree in the church. And so that's all good things, right? To further educate, to further catechize the people of God on the law of the church. And heck, I need this, right? I'm no expert in the law of the church, so I always need to learn more about the code of canon law and my role as a pastor, the role of the people, the way the sacraments are lived in our church. So all of these things are very good. And so there's liturgical law, there's the code of canon law, there's particular laws that are just part of a diocese, there's particular laws that are part of religious orders. So laws are a good thing, right? Because they give us an order to life, right? If we didn't have any laws in society, it'd be chaos, right? Anarchy. So the presenter talked about law of the church in relation to this beacons of light process that were going on through the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. And I think if you ask almost anybody in the Archdiocese, right? And I'm making a whole lot of assumptions here, but if you ask priests, if you ask people, if you ask those in leadership, right? The Archbishop himself, is the beacons of light something that we just can't wait to do? And when we were dreaming of our vocation, of our life in the church, this was something, a massive reorganization and re-evangelization process. Is this something that any of us would want to do? Like this kind of just restructuring? No. right? None of us were excited about doing this, and the need to do something, right? That was never something that we all like dreamed upon. So this, I don't think, is anybody's pet project, right? Anybody's like really excited about the need to kind of rearrange parishes or anything like that, right? Like we just got to start with, this is not anybody's bucket list, right? This is anybody's dream to be able to engage in something like this, which of course begs the question, why are we doing this? Why are we entering into this whole beacons of light process? And I could maybe just give a bit of the backstory for the beacons of light. And I think really the origin for everything that we're entering into, at least in the last, I guess about 5 years or so, was in January of 2019. So in January of 2019, I had been a pastor of these 4 parishes. I'd been the pastor for about 6 or 7 months. And a priest who worked at the Archdiocese central offices called a meeting of all the pastors of multiple parishes throughout the Archdiocese. So this priest had just taken a role in the Archdiocese. He found kind of a survey of priests of multiple parishes that his predecessor had completed, and he thought, well, we should probably talk about this, right? So he calls a meeting in January of 2019 for all the pastors who serve in multiple parishes as just kind of a listening session. And if you've met a lot of priests in the Archdiocese, there's not a whole lot of like, we're different, right? We're all different. Whether that's liturgically, spiritually, in our understanding of the priesthood, right? There's the same basics, right? The catechism of the Catholic Church, but this gets lived differently amongst all of us, right? There's great differences between us. And yet there was a great unity in this room about how much guys were struggling. Right? Whether it was wild to just see, somebody who had been ordained 42 years make this point about the struggle, and then somebody who'd been ordained 10 years say, you know what, I would like to build upon this, and this is what I would like to add. Or somebody who is wearing a cassock say this, and somebody who is just wearing a collared shirt say, well, he's right, but moreover, da-da-da-da-da. Like there was this great unity in the room. Unfortunately, it's a unity based on how hard it is to minister, to lead multiple parishes. And there is a law in the Code of Canon Law. So Canon 526 says that the pastor is only to be entrusted with one parish, but this can be changed for a variety of reasons. He can be entrusted neighboring parishes, right, for a scarcity of priests. So the goal is to have one parish for each pastor. That's Canon 526 in the Code of Canon Law. And there's good reason. I think intuitively, all of us know this, right? If somebody has 2 families, right? A father has 2 families, that's going to be real hard. If somebody's going to be the CEO of 2 different organizations, good luck. If a bishop has 2 dioceses, that's not the way it's supposed to be. So for a pastor to have multiple parishes is not the ideal. So then why? Okay, there's like 5 pastors in the Archdiocese right now that don't have multiple parishes. It might be a bit of an exaggeration, but it's definitely not 10. So most of us, almost all of us, have multiple parishes. Why are we doing this? So after that meeting in January of 2019, the leaders at the Archdiocese kind of went back and said, okay, we need to study this, right? We got to figure out what's going on. And there was a group of priests that kind of came out with some proposals, but then the numbers got crunched. And basically the question that was asked, in 10 years, what's a realistic number of pastors that we can have in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati? And then our groupings of families should be identical to that, right? How many pastors will we legitimately be able to serve? How many pastors will we legitimately be able to have in the Archdiocese? With the simple caveat that we don't want priests to serve as pastors beyond their physical limitations, right? a little over a year ago, right, we had a number of priests serving as the pastor of the parish, sometimes multiple parishes, over 80 years old. And that seems, honestly, personally, it just felt cruel to expect somebody to give themselves so generously and so completely when at 80 years old, I get to minister to people who are in their 80s and the energy level wanes and you just don't quite have the get up that you need to. So they wanted to avoid people past retirement age just sticking on because they felt like they had to, right? Or something else would happen to the parish. So that immediately, right? 70 years old is generally the retirement age for priests, and at least from pastors, right? Priests are still very generous. So many of us are very generous in serving past the age of 70. But then the other caveat was, or there was a couple other ones, that a priest should be able to be ordained for 5, 6, 7, 8 years before becoming a pastor. And this was like a fist bump moment for me. I became a pastor after 2 years of ordination. And I don't say that to brag. I say that because that's not the way it should be. To become, at 29 years old, the leader of 4 parishes, or however many guys are, the pastor of, that's not ideal. And I think we all know that, right? The level of experience that it would just be nice to have if that 2 years was doubled or tripled or quadrupled to be 4, 6, or 8 years, that's got to be much healthier, so that right out of the gate, you can figure out kind of how to be a priest before getting thrown off into the deep end of being the pastor. And I would laud that, right? If guys would get an opportunity, priests would get an opportunity to kind of get their feet wet for 5 or 6 years, or maybe even more, before becoming a pastor. So that was 2 things. A third consideration in this is not all diocesan priests are called to be pastors. Some of us have different gifts, right? Not all of our gifts are going to be in leadership, in administration, of governance of the parish community. And that's okay, right? It's okay for somebody to say, actually, I think I'm really good at teaching high schoolers, and my place would really be best in a Catholic school, forming the next generation of Catholics, or somebody who really feels called to be a spiritual director and to be able to minister one-on-one to God's people, or to be in a chaplain when those people experience crisis in a hospital. They're available to serve in that capacity. And so not all priests are cut out to be pastors. And when we have so many assignments for pastors, then then there's not that option, and we're all kind of round peg, square hole, or square peg, round hole, whatever it is, to become a pastor. And maybe the last thing to consider of just this number of how many pastors we're able to have in the Archdiocese is to look at our religious communities. So many of our history here in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati goes to so many religious communities who staff parishes and did so many other wonderful things. You think about the Marianists were so generous in Dayton and Cincinnati, and I grew up at a parish that was staffed by the Society of Mary, the Marianist religious community. Loved their ministry. They're no longer able to be there. The Franciscans in Cincinnati, or the Jesuits, are also in Cincinnati. The Dominicans have a parish in Cincinnati. In the area where I serve as priest in the northern part of the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, the Precious Blood were so faithful and gave so many great priests to this diocese. But I think maybe all of us know that number is shrinking. The number of religious priests serving in parishes in the Archdiocese continues on a downward trend. And so as these religious communities are unable to serve as parish pastors, that means us, the diocesan priests, will come in to serve those parishes, as we have. One of the parishes I'm the pastor at St. Joseph in Wapakoneta. I'm the 3rd diocesan pastor after their entire history of being served as by the Precious Blood, and so generously. So those are all the considerations that when it's the Archdiocese is asking that question of how many pastors in 10 years are we going to have based on ordinations, retirements, religious communities, right? Knowing that it'd be best if guys aren't pastors right away, right? If priests could maybe spend 5, 6, 7 years in a parish before becoming a pastor. And knowing that we want priests to be able to retire at 70, right? When they're still, before it's like their effectiveness, our effectiveness is dwindling, knowing full well I will get in that place, seemingly sooner rather than later. Also that not all priests are cut out to be pastors, right? Some are going to be teachers and spiritual directors and hospital chaplains. And then finally that the religious communities in the archdiocese are not going to be able to serve in all the roles that they had served for decades, for centuries in some cases. And so when the numbers were crunched, the number 60 pastors in the next 10 years, right? And so they went through, and this was the consultation process that we went through maybe 15, 18 months ago about what groups of parishes ought to go together. And this is where, this is what happened, right? We call them the families of parishes. How are these parishes going to be grouped together? And that's not an exact science, right? There's kind of a way that you kind of can do geographically and kind of culturally how things should go together, but it's not a perfect science to gerrymander the entire archdiocese into 60 pastorates. And as these groupings of parishes were brought together for 60 pastors, there was an interesting statistic that kind of rose to the surface that I think everybody should be aware of. So our Archdiocese of Cincinnati has about 450,000 Catholics. So we are the 38th, I believe, 38th largest diocese in the country. I'm told that we have the 8th most number of parishes in the country. So we've got a lot smaller parishes for the number of people that we serve. And that's nobody's fault, right? Our diocese, because of its great history, a lot of the infrastructure was built before everybody had cars. It's why you can go to an area in Mercer County and there's a church every 3 or 4 miles, right? It's because people didn't have cars when all of these parishes were founded. And even on the west side of Cincinnati, there's this neighborhood called Price Hill. And within just a couple miles, there's 5 or 6 parishes that historically were just huge. But that's in some ways because it was very densely populated and people didn't have cars. So you think about this. I think we have 453,000 Catholics and 211 parishes. So just to make a comparison, the Archdiocese of Detroit has 216 parishes. So almost the same number of parishes as us. Meanwhile, the Archdiocese of Detroit has 1.1 million Catholics. So whereas we have 450,000, they have 1.1 million Catholics and 216 parishes, whereas we have 211. So they have, compared to the population, their parishes are much bigger, right? And there's a lot that's population-wise. Similarly, in the Archdiocese of Newark, right? They have about the same number of parishes, right? They have 207 parishes. Remember, we have 211. The Archdiocese of Newark, New Jersey, though, has 1.3 million Catholics. Right? So just vastly different in the number of Catholics for about low 200s number of parishes. And maybe just one last example to just show a very, very stark difference. The Archdiocese of Atlanta, my parents have moved to Atlanta, so it's just growing exponentially. The Archdiocese of Atlanta currently has 1.1 million Catholics in it. How many parishes? The Archdiocese of Atlanta has 92 parishes to serve 1.1 million Catholics. That's so different from our Archdiocese that has 211 parishes serving 453,000 Catholics. So those are things that like we just have to wrestle with in our own diocese, because we have enough priests really, right, to serve the people. It's just the parishes are so much smaller than other places in the country in similar sized dioceses. So they went through and we put together these groupings of parishes, right? And what happened though over the years, right, was the scramble, right? If we can rip off a big Band-Aid all at once of grouping these parishes and moving the priests as we did back in the summer of 2022, what it's going to prevent is a scramble. Now, while we were discerning as a diocese this kind of approach to just group all the parishes together and then change the pastors, right, all at once, there was a sense of, well, maybe what we can do is do this in phases, right? 1 year we could do all of these families of parishes, and then the next year we could do all of these, and then the third year we could kind of group all of these. But that unfortunately did not work. It didn't seem as feasible with how big of an operation we were doing. It was just easier and more convenient to just do it all at once. And because you notice a place like Columbus just released a plan, and they're kind of spot merging parishes, closing some. And that was another option, right? If we have 60 pastors, well, what if we just closed all but 60 parishes in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati? And I'm starting to smile because you could imagine how that would go, right? 211 minus 60, that'd be about 150 closures all in 1 year. And that doesn't seem like the right thing to do. So as a diocese, we were starting to get to this kind of crisis mode where we had so many places for pastors and no priests to fill it. So for example, in 2021, Springfield, the Catholic churches in Springfield basically did beacons before there was the beacons of light, because there was not anybody that we could assign. There didn't seem to be anybody who was going to be assigned as the pastor of 2 parishes in Springfield. There was another guy who was the pastor of the other 2 parishes in Springfield. So what happened was we said, okay, these are all just going to be one family of parishes, and we'll send a parochial vicar. We were simply running out of pastors in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. And so what this massive change meant is it gives us a time to plan and to get to the year, 2030, 2031, where we legitimately will only be able to have 60 pastors, right? And so this gives us, and who knows what will happen in those 10 years, right? 10 years is a long time a lot of things could change, right? And we'll, in all likelihood, definitely in the next 10 years, we're going to get a new archbishop. But I'd maybe ask, if you're wondering about this whole process, what other option is there, right? What other option is there if we know in 10 years that we're going to have 60 pastors? What other option is there than to begin to plan, right? You could just close 150 parishes. I don't know how that would go, right? Like, let's just be honest. Do we do only the strong survive? How do you just do the 50 biggest parishes or the 60 biggest parishes? I don't see any other option if we're going for that goal of 150 of what we're going to do. And so this is what happened, right? This is how things were grouped. And I know it ain't pretty, right? Like, man, it's hard. And I'm in a place that's been relatively stable. The 4 parishes have been together for 10 years now, I think. Almost, maybe 8 years. But it's hard. And I know one of the things that people are really struggling with is getting to know the priests, right? Because there's basically teams of priests serving groups of parishes. And so you don't see the same person every Sunday, right? You don't see the same priest every Sunday. And so it feels unstable. And that's different than a lot of places are used to, right? You're used to just having our priest, that's the one, he's the one of our parish. So I know there's some places where it's like, well, let's just stay put and we can just get to know everybody. And you get that, right? Everybody likes stability. Everybody likes familiarity. But what will happen in a short term, nobody moving, could have long-term ramifications. So let's say hypothetically, you've got a group of 3 priests, right? And you desire to have everybody stay put every weekend so that the priest can get to know people better, right? And he can minister to them. And we all love that, right? As a priest, you love to know the people. You don't like seeing the same people a different every weekend. But think about what that does. If you have a newly ordained parochial vicar who's there for 3 years, then Parish X will have him there for 3 years. And then after 3 years, you'll have another one. And then maybe you'll get an older one who's there for 4 years, but then when he retires, right? So one parish will get the pastor who's there for a long period of time, and another parish is just going to be able to cycle through. And that, like every 2 or 3 years, changing the priest that's yours, that could have some serious long-term effects, right? Of a parish that never has any stability. And so hopefully in assigning a pastor, and sometimes, right, the number of priests is going to ebb and flow, right? That group with 3 priests might one year only have 2, but maybe we have a big ordination class and they've got 4. But this provides stability because we can definitely have 60 pastors. Now it's a whole different ballgame ministering in a place where there are, you're the only priest versus there's 3 priests. But I can say the parish I grew up in Dayton, we had 2 parochial vicars, right? There was a pastor and 2 other priests that worked alongside of him. And when you came to Mass, you didn't know who it was going to be. If it was going to be Father Lee, if it was going to be Father Kenny, or if it was going to be Father Charles, right? It was going to be one of the 3. Actually, it wasn't always. Sometimes we'd have a visiting priest come and cover for vacations. So having a rotation of priests is not anything out of the ordinary, right? You hear of days when, like, St. Augustine in Minster had a pastor and 3 parochial vicars, right? There were 4 priests, definitely at least 3 priests. So we've been used to ministering with multiple priests. It's been a while, right? But we're going to figure it out, right? There's definitely some growing pains, and you even think, like, everybody wants long-term stability, unless your long-term stability isn't great. Right? Sometimes if I'm at the same place and I'm not a great priest, well, at least you get to cycle through, right? And you don't get, right? If you got the same priest for 12 years and he's the dud, then whoops, that's not great. So hopefully in providing pastors that are able to be pastors and to give some sort of long-term stability, even if they're only around every 2, 3, or 4 weeks, at the least it provides maybe a 5, a 7, 10, 12 years of stability for the one who's in charge, even if the parochial vicars are cycling out a little bit more regularly as it'll kind of necessitate over these next few years. So I know there's a lot of frustration about not being able to get to know the priests as easily, but it is just the first year of this Beacons of Light process, right? It is just the first year, and we're all going to have to figure out ways to get to know each other in ways little and big, and ways new and old. And so hopefully over time we can do that. I think of my parents, since they've moved to Atlanta, the Atlanta area, they've been in different places where they've been different sizes. So right now they're in kind of the outskirts of Atlanta where there's only one parish in the entire county, and it's not a very big parish. And so there's a little bit ability to get to know each other. But when they were closer in and going to a parish that was closer to the city and kind of the big suburbs, I mean, there was 7 masses on Sunday. I mean, it's all under one roof, but it's huge, a huge place. And so they're experiencing the difference of relationships with pastors and people and all of these different things. So one of the other things, it seemed like in these meetings, as I'm just this canon law event, as I'm getting to talk to people on their thoughts, there does seem to be a lot of fear about the closing of buildings. So just maybe a quick, and I believe this was mentioned, a quick canon law jump in. There's a difference between a parish. A parish is a geographic territory, right? Almost you think of it as like a polling precinct or a township. And then the parish church is the building. Now for years, these two things have been synonymous, right? A parish and a church. Each parish only had one church building. However, if you go like in a parish that has a perpetual adoration chapel, you have one place that's the parish church, and then you have another place that is the chapel, right? That would be the perpetual adoration chapel, or maybe a day chapel. You even think about a place like St. Michael in Findlay. If you've ever been up to St. Michael in Findlay, they have this massive new church that was built on the outskirts of Findlay. It's the only parish in Hancock County, I believe. But then they still have the old church that still gets used in downtown Findlay. So they're kind of going with this one parish, multiple churches. And so there's some fear about a church closing, right? So that we're talking about the building closing. So the law of the church provides two different scenarios, right? So a parish can never be closed, right? Because a parish is a geographic territory. It can't just simply be wiped off the map, right? The one exception being there's places in like the Middle East where no Catholics live anymore. There were at one point Catholics, or maybe in Northern Africa, but because all the Catholics left and the Muslims moved in, there is no parish. So that parish closes because there are no Catholics. Not the case for our area, right? So a parish is a geographic territory, and what happens with a parish is it gets merged, right? So it gets merged with a neighboring, or maybe 3 parishes can get merged together. A building is different, right? So a building is God's house. And so what the church says is a building can only close for a grave cause. And what it means is it can be basically relegated to sordid use. That's the technical term. So a building to get relegated to sordid use, and that would even be for it to be maybe demolished, has to be for a grave cause. The merging of parishes for a just cause. So a grave cause, right, for closing a building. And why is it a grave cause? Because it's God's house, right? And so we take this very importantly, that no priest wants to close a building, right? Because this is God's house. Sure, it is built by our ancestors, but before else, it's a space in the world dedicated to the Lord. And so we don't want to be willy-nilly with these buildings. Of course, sometimes buildings aren't able to be kept up, right? Maybe the roof is collapsed. It needs $90,000 in repairs, or maybe $100,000. I know there's places in Cincinnati that need a new roof, and it's like over the $1 million mark. And you think, are we going to be able to do this? Well, that, of course, is that pastor and the parish to figure out. But largely in our area, the buildings are kept up, right? They're able to meet the ongoing maintenance need and sometimes even do improvements to make things better. I know in our 4 parishes, people are very generous in supporting the building projects, and I anticipate that will keep going. So I don't think any buildings are going to close. I can't say that absolutely, but in our general area, people seem to take care of the buildings, and we use them all, and we need them all, right? And these are God's house, and so we're able to upkeep. Other places, right, things maybe have years of deferred maintenance. Well, that could be a different story. I don't know. I can only speak in my area. So a grave cause for the relegation of a building to sordid use, but a just cause for the merging of parishes. And and they talked in this meeting a little bit about what a just cause is. And it's not just like one simple thing. Because we're doing a diocesan merger, these 2 parishes get merged. No. It's got to be, oftentimes it's a preponderance of reasons, right? There aren't as many people coming to the sacraments anymore. They're served by one pastor, and each pastor is only supposed to have 1 parish, so we're just going to put his parish into 4 parishes. A lack of priestly vocations, like all of these things together, and they listed a number of things in these meetings about what is a just cause for the merging of parishes. Many parishes, this is going to be years out, right? Throughout the archdiocese, like this is the last step of the beacons of light. And I know many people are beginning to kind of get worried about this one, about the merging of parishes, and there's kind of some fear-mongering as they're just going to destroy our churches too, or they're going to get rid of them, they're going to demolish them. And that is not part of the plan, right? Getting rid of church buildings because there's God's house, right? Parish and boundaries, those aren't divine establishment, right? Those get merged throughout history. So the buildings, right? There's no like long-term plan of losing buildings. It's the parishes that plan to get merged, right? And so you might wonder, like, why? How does that benefit if we're one parish that has to then take care of 4 buildings? And here's just my experience of being the pastor of 4 parishes. let's say we need to hire a new role. So I'm going total hypothetical on this. It's like we have tons of young adults here, but we're not doing a great job to minister to them. Can we hire a young adult minister? And then you have to look at all 4 parishes to say, can parish A afford it? Can parish B afford it? Can parish C afford it? Can parish D afford it? And is that possible, right? And maybe there's different priorities, right? This finance committee says yes, this financial committee says absolutely not. And so we're unable to row in the same direction. So what is our budget going to be? And so being able to work together, if we have one team of priests, one team of laity serving this group of people, we're actually able to budget a lot better. We're actually able to look forward to kind of different things a lot better, because the funds, although they keep the buildings up, they do a whole lot more, right? There's so much that your money gets used for. And so we're so grateful for your generosity. But we got to think about all the different things that the funds, that the donations, that the tithes of people goes for. And if we can pull things together, we might be able to reduce redundancies, right? We might be able to say like, okay, we're all working in the same office. We don't need to pay 2 internet bills. We don't need to have multiple websites that get kept up, right? And we can all figure out, we have to prioritize about how the projects that we're gonna do, but heck, it's all doable. So I see a great advantage in just planning, budgeting, so that I don't, if you're the pastor of 5 parishes, going to 5 finance committee meetings, yikes. But going over to one finance committee that can then look at the entire parish, hey, that can really do a good thing. And having people not at fighting for money, not fighting for Father's attention, but actually being able to come together and have the entire concerns for the entire group of people, not just their own interest group, right? Because sometimes when there's multiple parishes, it can look like an edition of Congress, right? And you think about Congress, maybe a senator stands up and just kind of goes on a list of this is what's best for the people of Missouri. But it's like, man, what does that have to do with the entire people of the United States, this bill, right? And so it's great as a pastor to have people that can advise you on not just one little area, but on the entire group, which is something I've just really appreciated, because we have emerged a single pastoral council and they have the concern for all of the people, and it's a beautiful thing. So the last thing that I just wanted to touch on is related to finances, because I know at these canon law events, one of the things that was suggested was to start a 501c3 that people can then give to, and then that money gets given to the parish. And I think it was for 2 reasons. One, to ensure that money gets used as the people desire, right? To make sure it gets used for their parish in the right way. And secondly, to avoid the what do we call it? Gosh, the money that goes to the archdiocese. So largely 9.5% of what a parish takes in is then sent to the diocese to fund diocesan ministries. Now, the first thing I'd just like to say is the ministries of the archdiocese is helpful, right? So the legal team at the archdiocese, basically pro bono, people who have experience in offering legal advice to parishes, to dioceses, to Catholic schools, are on the call and they're already paid for. And that is a huge help, right? Financially, the archdiocese does a great job of making sure that the finances are run smoothly, right? Our financial accounting system, the archdiocese has access to. Not access to the money. They don't have access to the bank accounts. What they do is to our ledger to make sure things are running appropriately, to make sure, checks and balances, and there's not money getting funneled into the wrong place. My mom was an auditor out of college, and she said it's disheartening how many people steal from the church. But so the archdiocese does their best, and they keep getting better every year about how they're helping financial controls in the different parishes. So our money gets well used, right? Does it get perfectly used? No. But does any money ever get perfectly used? I don't know. Probably not this side of heaven, right? Like there's every dollar get perfectly used. Show me an organization that does that and I'll be surprised. But do they do a good job? Do they provide good services? I think so, right? So people want to start a 501c3, or it was suggested to start a 501c3 in your parish to avoid that diocesan money, but then also to ensure the money gets used how the people want to. I just have a number of concerns with this. Like, I have a lot of just like hesitations to this creating a separate nonprofit to spend money to fund the parish. My first concern is, who's going to be in charge, right? Like, you've seen, and I don't think anybody has ill intent who is suggesting this, right? I don't think anybody is really doing this because they think they're going to steal. However, anytime people have access to money, to bank accounts, it is a near occasion to sin, right? It just is to have access to that. And so one of the things about having a parish account is right now we have multiple eyes going over that checking account. The archdiocese can look into our accounts to make sure there's not money leaving in different ways, right? They can't spend the money, but they can look to make sure it's getting spent in the ways that we're actually saying, and there's no fishy checks being written anywhere. So if a group of people want to say, hey, donate to this 501c3, I just worry that money is going to get, like, who knows what's going to happen there, right? And there's story after story about people who have attempted to steal from the church, and it's sad. Priests too. But then also, who decides where that money goes, right? Like, who decides how that money is going to get spent in the parish? Right? How does that work? And that just creates a whole thing, right? And that, for myself, like a budget, like, you don't know what money is income, and do you have to go to this group of people, this board, to then donate to the parish? And the church went through an issue in the United States called lay trusteeism, where they went through basically all of these same issues, and it was maybe 150 years ago, sometime in the 1800s, and it produced a lot of issues in the church, a lot of battles, a lot of internal fights within the church. And so I think there's a lot of issues that could come of this. It's like, okay, who's running the budget, right? Like, so-and-so, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, are they going to wield all the power in the parish? I mean, like, gosh, you got to really think this thing. We got to think this thing through before we do it. And even in the canon law of the church, that the parish has the right to administer the goods and the temporal resources according to as the parish sees fit. So that's not, the bishop from the top can't dictate how that's going to happen. The board of whatever 501c3 should not be able to dictate that, but it is the parish itself, with the finance committee, the pastoral council, the pastor's team, all of those, to be able to say, this is what the will of God is for our area. So there's some law in the church that also would kind of give a big hesitation to starting a 501c3 to administer the money that the faithful are tithing to the parish. So the last thing I just kind of mentioned was this internal fighting. And gosh, that seems to be happening, right? Within a parish, right? We're getting so wrapped up, and these are important things. These are important discussions. But in some ways you think, is it a distraction from the salvation of souls? And I know the salvation of souls was mentioned multiple times at these meetings. But is people's faith so fickle that if money doesn't go in the right place, they're just going to walk away? I don't think the people's faith is that fragile. Maybe a couple people, but they're teetering on the edge. And I don't mean to be accusatory, but if people just simply walk away because they don't get what they want, I haven't met people who I think their faith is on that edge, where half the people in our parishes are going to wander away, or 30% are going to wander away if the money doesn't change, doesn't go to exactly what they think. Is people's faith that shallow? I hope not. I hope not. And I haven't met people who I think that, the people in the pews are just incredibly good people, and they love Jesus Christ, and to think that this is going to, it might be hard, but this is just going to shatter the faith? I don't think so. Because you think about what this is doing in all of us. I think myself, right? You make hard decisions, people aren't happy. And it's been for me a time of great growth to say, well, is my role to make everybody happy. And there's parts of me that wants to make everybody happy, right? I want people to like me, to say, you're doing a great job, or we're really happy with the decision or the direction. But is that the reason that we exist, is to keep people happy? And that's been a transformation, right? There's tears, there's sweat. The AC isn't on in this room, and I'm sweating a little bit if you can't see it. But of this transformation to say, well, we have to look at what God is calling us to do. And it's never easy. But we were born for this moment. Everybody watching who's a member of the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, every priest in the Archdiocese, when the Lord had in the idea of his mind at the dawn of eternity, our existence, this was part of our story. And as much as we'd like to say, I'd like to live at a different time, this is our time. This is the one the Lord has placed before us. So all of the internal discussions and disagreements, as important as they are, they can't become a distraction, because there may very well be people out there who are worried about the salvation of souls. There may be people out there who are lost. Sorry, let me rephrase that. And our job as the church has to be as able as possible to reach them. And so that has to be the love and the mercy. And so we could spend our time going to every appeal in the Rome, and there's a place for that, right? Appeals in the Vatican are there because they're necessary and they're important. But we have to ask, is this how God is asking us to use our time before we go to that step, right? Is this how the Lord wants us to use our time, our resources, our energy? When there are so many people that don't know the love, that they don't know Jesus Christ, that they've never met him, and maybe our time is better spent doing that. Maybe our time is better spent grabbing a beer with a friend who has walked away from the faith and just invited them to a life in Christ. Maybe that's the best way to spend our time, is to draw people back to him, and even to sit before his feet and beg the Lord in mercy to renew the face of the earth. That's why the church exists. Parishes and dioceses, they will always change, right? Since the time of Jesus Christ for 2,000 years, how the church has brought the gospel to the people has developed over time. Dioceses come and go, parishes come and go, monasteries come and go, religious orders come and go, priests come and go. So we got to ask, how is the Lord asking us to do with the time that we've been given? Is he asking us to fight? Is he asking us to evangelize? Is he asking us to pray? And so I guess I just leave that here. If you have more questions, feel free to email me. I thank everybody who watched. I know this is kind of a long video, but this is something that strikes the heart. What are we about? And if we can kind of reorganize ourselves, right? It's like a battle where everybody gets spread so thin, the troops get spread so thin that they have to kind of do a strategic retreat so that then they can go back out and fight. I think that's what this time is. And we're in the midst of the retreat, right? We're in the midst of maybe even huddling together to get ourselves back in order. But the ultimate goal is so that we can go out and fight better, because we've gotten spread so thin. So I hope that's what this time will do. And it'll be a time of transformation. Gosh, it is for our entire presbyterate, for all the groups of priests. It is for me, right? It's not easy, but this is the time the Lord has made for us. It isn't for the laity either. And if you're watching this, maybe you've had your own struggles with this Beacons of Light. But I'll be praying for our entire archdiocese. I know there's so many people that are praying that this may be a transformative experience. Whether it's our self-love, whether it's our stubbornness, whether it's our bitterness, whether it's our lack of trust in God, the Lord is going to want to shed us from so much. And I hope this time, these years of the Beacons of Light may be ones that we have a spiritual renewal in our diocese, in our local church, so that people may know the goodness of God, so that people may experience the goodness of the Eucharist, the power of mercy and the sacrament of reconciliation, the power of the sacred scriptures, and ultimately friendship with Jesus Christ. So I could keep talking for hours. You've already probably watched enough of this. So be assured of my prayers for everybody in the Archdiocese. If we watch this, great. If you think it would be helpful to send this to somebody, feel free to do so. God bless. Take care. And God loves each and every one of you so much.